Hello. Welcome to This Week in Politics. Well, funny story. This is the second taping of this show today. Um, First time I taped it, I got all the way through it. Well, almost all the way through it. And looked down at the recording and realized I did the whole thing with no sound. So, and I technically I don't know how to do stuff, so I just went in and did the best I could to fix it. So the good news is it ought to go a lot smoother this time since I've already done it. And for those of you that don't know, I always do these programs from notes. I don't do anything rehearsed or pre-programmed or written down unless I'm doing an article. Um, but so anyway, I want to talk about this week. I want to talk about one of the main pillars of conservatism, and it has been said so many times and heard so many times that I think it's lost its meaning, and especially for the millennials. In the many programs that I do for the Right Wing Reverend and for here and other shows, one thing that has always amazed me is the millennials. They, as on is 30, just turned 31 years old. And he's never had, to his memory, a conservative president. And yet he's a staunch conservative, which tells me that he's operating with his brain and not with his emotion, which is awesome. I'm proud of him. But for the most part, all of his friends are all Bernie backers. And, uh, and when you sit down and explain to them, they all give you the same pablum answers, uh, mainly because they've been indoctrinated. They don't know how to think; they know what to think. And the fact that uh, President Trump is a conservative and he took drastic measures right up front for our tax cut, that reached the millennials. They saw the money in their paycheck. And now that they filed their income taxes, they've seen that they get cash back. Okay, so this is making an impact. And you follow that logic down. Now, what I want to do is I want to try to talk about something that they can relate to, like the financial thing that Trump has done, and then we're going to go into something that is that they haven't experienced, but should be part of conservatism. When the liberals will always and millennials will always respond when you talk about tax cuts, they always say, "Well, how are we going to fund government because the money will go down?" And the reason they say that is because they've never been taught reality. This has been done many times throughout our history, and every time it is done, it works. And the liberals always cry, but they're always proven wrong, and somehow the public forgets. So, when and this it happened and has happened and is happening exactly like conservatives have been saying for decades. When you cut personal and corporate taxes, things happen. The taxes don't go down. The tax cut on the businesses gives them more money to invest in their business. So they hire more people. When they hire more people are getting paychecks. And out of those paychecks, those more people are paying taxes. Also, when businesses have more money, they're buying more equipment, which means the people that are supplying that equipment are making money. And when they're making more money, they hire more people and they have more people getting paychecks and paying taxes. That's the way that it works. And then when it comes to the personal point, like the millennials are now experiencing, when they cut the personal tax rate and you have more tangible cash in your hands, you can do different things. You can save it, you can pay off a bill, you can spend it willy nilly. You can invest it. There's many things that you can do. And when you take that times 300 million American people, that makes a huge impact on the economy. It spurs growth. And I always like to liken it like this. Would you like to have 100% of $100 or 10% of $1 million? So what does that mean? That means that when we are talking about taxes, there are the way the conservatives have always done it has always been the right way. But the millennials didn't know that. And that's why Bernie almost won. But now that the millennials will have time to spend living under a conservative president, hopefully they will remember and pass on to their kids, like we're trying to do to ours, what it's like to live under a conservative president versus living under a repressive liberal like Obama. When you think about all of the regulations and all of the taxes and all of the, uh, America is bad and we're lead from behind and our military was weak and they go to it's under Trump where America is strong and make America great and lower our taxes and bring businesses back to this country. When they live through that, they will always choose conservative unless they're just brainwashed, which the liberals are. The difference between liberals and conservatives is this: liberals do not go by ideology. They are motivated by money and power. That's all. They use emotions and they use topics and they use government to get what they want. Conservatives operate from ideology and beliefs. We believe certain things. Cutting taxes is one of them. And the one I want to talk about today is another one, and that is less government. When we talk about less government, what we mean is, it would be nice to just be able to cut the size from, 10% each year for 5 years. That'd be great, but that's not what we mean. We mean that the government intrudes into every area of our life. Every area. I don't think that's normal. That's not what is normal in my life. And I'm going to show you in a minute. For the millennials, when I go through this, they're going to think, well, that's just normal. That's the way that it's done. No. And that's one thing they need to learn. We need to cut the intrusion of the federal government into our lives. Now, if you still want to have 100,000 people on, whatever the number is, of people in the government, that's fine, but have them out of my life, you know? So what I want to do to bring this home to you is I want to go through different phases in our lives, and I want to show you through each stage of the life how the federal government, through taxes, through regulations, through control, has intruded into every area of our life. And when we're done, you're going to see that there's not one thing that you can do, not one thing, where the government isn't in our life. And we need to cut that out. We need to stop that. We need to cut that back. The liberals like to say when a conservative gets up and says something like, we need to get rid of the IRS, I believe we need to get rid of the IRS, the EPA, the Department of Education, and probably the majority of the Department of Personnel. And that's just to get started. And then we need to go through and cut the people that are left. We need to cut 10% out of every agency until we get to the point to where now they're actually earning their money. That's how I believe. And I believe that's how most conservatives believe. Now, I want to acknowledge up front that I'm going to list some things here that I think that are normal, that we all see every day, and that we can all pretty much assume that for the greater good, these are parts of the government that do probably need to stick around. Okay. The police and the fire departments, our court systems, the legislature, uh, the Food and Drug Administration, as much as I hate that department, they do or used to do a good job. Um, but because of the government control, as an example, did you know that the United States is the only country on the planet that accepts GMO food into our food chain? The other countries won't accept it. There's a reason this country has a major growth of cancer in this country, and I believe GMOs is one of them. In fact, I know for a fact that the research on GMOs, as it was approved by the federal government, was still causing major cancer growths within the vegetables and then within the animals that would eat the vegetables. I know that to be a fact. I read the book, but Monsanto bribed and lied and manipulated their way through the system and got it approved. Monsanto is from Satan, by the way. I don't know if I can say that and get away with it, but it is true. If you read the book about Monsanto and GMOs and getting it approved, I don't remember the name of the book, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But guns is another one. The federal government, when I was young, if I wanted to go hunting, I'd grab my gun that I bought at Walmart an hour ago, and then I go down to my local store and I'd put out my $10 and get my shotgun shells and I go hunting. It doesn't work that way today. To go get your gun, you got to fill out a bunch of paperwork, wait 3 days, have a background check done, then go back and pick up your gun. And then if you want to go get your ammunition, you have to show your authorization to have a gun, sign some paperwork, and then get your things. And then you have to get a license to go hunt wherever it is you want to hunt and have the government tell you how much you can get of what you want to hunt. Things have changed, and they haven't changed for the better. The federal government is way too involved. For somebody to go hunting and have to go through all of that is wrong. The Constitution says we have a right to bear arms, and that right is given to us by God, not by the government. And somehow or other, in the last 100 years, we have gone to. Now, I want you to think about this. If you own a gun, the federal government knows everything there is to know about you, including your mental health. And it's in writing, on paper, somewhere in the bureaucracy. And then when you add that to your income tax, where they know everything financially about you, it's a scary thing. The federal government, the goal of the federal government is not to serve the people. The federal government's goal is control and manipulation under the leadership of the liberals. A true conservative wants government to be small. I want the federal government to do what the Constitution says the federal government should do. Now, I realize times have changed, and there are some things probably that need to be done by the federal government. Because Americans don't grow their own food, we probably do need the Food and Drug Administration with oversight. Because we have mass distribution of medications, the Drug Administration is probably needed with strict oversight. But for the most part, I think the government needs to be, the IRS needs to go away. EPA needs to go away. Department of Education needs to go away. Why do we have a Department of Education when education is supposed to be local? Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I want to break this down so let's start with birth. When you're born, a lot happens, okay? When they do paperwork on a newborn baby, they have both parents' names and everything about them, where they're born, uh, how old you are, what your date of birth is, the baby's date of birth. I mean, everything that they can possibly get on paper, they get in paper, and then they take fingerprints and footprints. And that cute little picture, that the hospital offers the moms, that's also taken and put into the file. That file is then sent to the hospital records, and they make copies and they ship that off to Washington. So every baby that's born has a file at the hospital where they were taken and a file in Washington or somewhere in the federal bureaucracy. And that's just on the day you're born, the federal government knows everything there is to know about you. That is way too much intrusion into my life. Now, from birth to 5 years old, there are a lot of things that the federal government does to make sure that that 5-year-old, when they go to school, has conformed to what they consider to be the norms and ready to be institutionalized, I mean educated. As an example, immunizations. When I was young, I had a couple of immunizations all the way through school, and then about 12 years old, everybody my age got a polio shot, and that polio shot left a scar on our arms where that air gun shot into our arms. So everybody in our age has got that mark. Fast forward, I saw a list the other day of immunizations that children are required to have, and there are many, many, many of them. I would have to guess there was probably 60 or 75 different medications. I don't know how many shots they put that into, but there was a lot of medicines that went into our kids. And I'll tell you a story about immunizations. As I said, I had all my shots. I was fine, and I didn't have to have many. Polio, measles, and mumps. And there might have been one or two others that I don't know about. But at the age of about 12 years old, my dad went back into the military, and we were getting ready to go overseas, and we had to have our shots done. And I went in, and one day I had 3 shots in each arm all at the same time. That is a lot of drugs to be put into anybody, much less a 12-year-old boy. The federal government has got too much power in invading my body and telling me what drugs needs to go into my body. Also, up to 5 years old, you are now required to apply for a Social Security card before you can deduct your kids off of your income taxes, which means, again, you have to fill out the paperwork, a number is assigned, and here's the thing. When the federal government gets the notification that a baby is born, there's an account opened through the Social Security office, and there's X amount of dollars put in there for X amount of dollars put into each account for each child born. And that money is kept on deposit in a bank. So based on the paperwork, the Social Security that you agreed to pay, the federal government, you are now part of the federal government. You are technically owned by the federal government, and you are just a straw man out doing whatever job you do. But to the government, financially, you are a number in a bank. And if you don't believe me, look at the back of your Social Security card. You will see an account number on there. That is the account number in a bank in Washington, D.C., I believe, or New York City. And I've seen this done several times where people make purchases or pay tickets, and they use a check using the routing number and that account number on that Social Security card, and it gets paid. So you got to ask yourself, if you're 1 year old, why do you need that other than to do that? Because when I was growing up, you didn't need to apply for a Social Security card until you started working. I mean, that makes logical sense. If the purpose of the Social Security card is to pay into your Social Security account for when you retire, then you don't need the Social Security card until it's time to start paying into your account. And you don't start paying into your account till you start working, which is 17, 16, 17, 18 years old. Why do they require you to have one now before you're 1 year old? Because whoever's controlling the banks and the money wants that account open now, and the federal government puts money in there. That's why. It's about the money and the control. Corporal punishment is now illegal in the home. I want you to think about that. When I was a kid, we didn't have major problems with kids because corporal punishment was done universally in the home and at school. Kids were kept in line. When the government stepped in and made corporal punishment illegal, that's when things went wrong. When kids know that there's no consequences and no accountability, they turn into animals. And especially when they're taught evolution in schools and they are taught that they are nothing but animals and there's no accountability so they can behave like animals, why wouldn't they? There's no consequences. And you can tell that that's true by just looking on YouTube. We now have students coming to school with weapons, fighting, raping our daughters, beating up on teachers. Any possible thing that you can think of because there's no accountability. There's no consequences for their actions. And that is all because of liberal policies. That is not what conservatives want. We want corporal punishment back in schools and in our homes. We want the parents to be in control of the education, not the federal government. Here's another one. This sounds silly, but this is true. Car seats. We've had cars since the 1920s. We didn't have car seat regulations till the late 70s. Today, every person that has a child, if they're in a car, needs to have a car seat. And it has to be age and weight appropriate. And it has to be installed in a certain way. And it has to be, there's 2 or 3 different versions you go through. And the child has to be a certain height before he can get out of the, I mean, the federal government is in my car telling me that I have to wear a seatbelt, my child has to be this, and this has to be that. Human race survived just fine all the way through the 70s without any of that. If I get into my car and I decide to take the chance that I will die in a head-on collision because I'm not wearing my seatbelt, I should be able to make that choice. Now, I'm not debating the rightness or wrongness of the policies. I'm saying the federal government is intruding. Just because they can legislate does not mean they should. Just because an idea is good does not mean it's good for everybody, and it does not mean you should legislate it. Like New York City banned the big sizing your burger order, like for $1 more, you can make it large or extra large. Well, that's probably a good idea, but there are some people that need that extra food. Think of all the people that play sports. If you burn up 10,000 calories a day, you need 10,000 calories going into your body. And if you eat burgers, supersizing it is probably the way to do that. It's not up to the federal government to tell me how much I can or can't eat. It shouldn't be anyway. But they are intruding in every aspect of our life. And up to 5 years old, when a child gets ready for school, the parents are told there are certain things a kid needs to know. How to say their ABCs, how to sit still, how to pay attention to the teacher, how to do what you're told. And this, to me, is about conformity. This is not about education. This is about indoctrination. They want us to teach our kids to conform to their rules. I do not call that education. I call that behavior modification, which is all the federal government wants from its people. They do not want educated people in this country. The federal government does not. They want uneducated sheeple that have been indoctrinated to the liberal viewpoint so that when they come around in the future to confiscate the guns, everybody's going to say, yeah, that's a good idea. We don't want guns. The government takes the guns, and then guess what happens? We become chattel. we lose our voice. The only reason that we're free, or the only reason that we still have elections, is because we still have guns. You take our guns away, what motivation do they have to have elections? What are we going to do? They'll just put guns and tanks all around the White House and say, "Yeah, do whatever it is you want. We'll just shoot y'all." When we have no way to fight back, that's when things become terrible. Look anywhere around the world. Look at every country in the world where they have no guns, and you will see a dictatorship. There is no democracy. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when they go to school, they want us to teach our children that institutions are a good thing. A school is an institution, passed off as something to educate. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't want my kids to think that institutions are good, because what that is teaching them indirectly is that the federal government is an institution. Therefore, federal government is good and big government is good. No, the opposite is true. Now, from the ages of 5 through 18, from kindergarten through high school, the government is in control of the education system. We have a Department of Education and the federal government. We get federal tax dollars put into our school system. There are grants and loans that are made to local government bodies for our school systems. The teachers union is a national lobbying body in Washington. The Obama administration pushed Common Core, which was a national federal government set of standards designed to indoctrinate our children under the guise of education. Our history proves that our property tax backs the fact that our children's education is supposed to be local. We pay property taxes on our local property to take care of our local schools. When the federal government gets involved, they start wielding power, and things like Common Core happen. The government is not into education, they are into indoctrination. They are not into individual thinking, they are into conformity. Also in this age group, something that most kids look forward to is their driver's license. Does something happen magically at the age of 16 when you're all of a sudden ready to drive? Not that I know of. In fact, most kids that I know of that live on farms have been driving since they were 10, 11, 12 years old. Driving a pickup truck or the tractor or the combine or they've been driving around the farm for years. So why did they pick 16? And why do you need a license to drive in the first place? And if we're going to assume that you need a license, why do I have to pay for it? If the federal government wants it, they should be paying me for it. They want that driver's license number so that they can track you at any time, at any place, anywhere you want. Any paperwork that you fill out, they ask for either your social security number or your driver's license number because they can track you. Car registration. When you go into the business office and you buy your car and you fill out all the paperwork, you don't own your car. The state now owns your physical car. You don't get a title even when you pay it off. You get a certificate of registration while you don't own it, and then a certificate of title after you've paid it off. But the actual title is held by the state, even after it's paid off. Just like when you're born and they open a Social Security account in your name and put money in it, the federal government now owns that piece of paper that has your name on it. That is you. The car is the same way. When you are paying for the state to own your car. Why is that important? Because let's assume that the federal government decides they want to declare martial law. They own every car in the country. They can pull every one of them off of the highway tomorrow with tow trucks with no ramifications. They own the title. They can control our mobility. Another thing that happens is upon graduation of high school, you have to register for the draft. Why do you have to do that? The federal government will say because we need to have a ready supply of able-bodied men and women to go fight in a war. That's poppycock. They want you to register because they want to know where you are, who you are, what has happened in your life since kindergarten, and everything about you. They want to keep track of you. They want to put another roadblock up for you, another hoop for you to jump through. And if you don't believe me, think about this. If you are required to get a social security number before you're 1 year old, okay? And that's true. If they really wanted an able-bodied bunch, why don't they just do like they did when they had the draft? Take all the social security cards that were issued 18 years ago and send them all a draft notice. Makes perfect sense to me. I mean, you've obviously kept track of them through the social security number through school, so you've got their address. It's about control. Also in that age bracket is when a lot of guys learn about fishing and hunting. Now, when I was young, I wanted to go hunting. I would grab my gun, go grab my bullets, go hunting. Today, it's not like that. I talked about that earlier. It's the same fishing. It used to be if I wanted to go fishing, just grab a pole, dig up some earthworms, and go fishing. It ain't like that today. You have to get a license to hunt and fish, and you have to pay for it every year. This is about money. It's about control. And not only do you have to pay for the right to go hunt for your own food or sport or game, you have to pay for it every year. You fill out the same paperwork, you pay the same fine, and the government tells you how much you can take. I'm sorry, but if I pay for it, I'll take what I'll take what I kill. You don't like it? I'll see you in court. If you're going to make me hunt, if you're going to make me pay to hunt, then I'm going to hunt and I'm going to get my money's worth. I'm not going to let you tell me how much I can hunt for. That's silly. It's about control and it's about money. And there are many other examples. Let's talk about 18 to 65 in your working years. The first one I want to talk about is college. Have you ever noticed that every state of the union has state colleges? Why do you think that is? You think the state's just being nice? No. State colleges are a bastion of liberal indoctrination and ideology. And those states will give you in-state tuition breaks, huge breaks, because the states want to make sure that you get indoctrinated the way they want you indoctrinated. And if you don't believe that, ask anybody that's gone to college. They will tell you that 99% of the professors on staff are all ultra left-wing liberals. And they want to turn out 99% of their kids to be ultra left-wing liberals. And believe it or not, it's happened. The millennials that are out there now, they are surprisingly overwhelmingly for Bernie backers. And why? Because they have not been taught about proper conservatism. They were lied to about Reagan. They were lied to about the state of the economy. I lived through Reagan. I know what it was like. And I lived through Jimmy Carter, ultra left-wing liberal. The difference between Carter And Reagan is going to be the difference between Obama and Trump. And I hope the millennials are paying attention, because this is going to be a defining moment in our country's history. And it's going to depend on the millennials. But colleges are there to indoctrinate. The state's indoctrination ideology. And they will pay you through lower tuition rates to go to their schools to get indoctrinated by them. The student loan guarantees. Why do you think they do that to the tune of trillions of dollars? Because the federal government also wants you indoctrinated in the liberal ideology, and they're willing to back up the payment. They don't want something stupid like money standing in the way of you getting indoctrinated through their ideology and through conformity. I mean, think about what the millennials have been through. They've been through presidents, possibly H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, W, and Obama. That is 28 years of left-wing politics in this country. 28 years. We haven't had a conservative in the White House since Reagan, and now we got Trump. So they don't know what conservatism is all about. All they know is what they've been told, what they've been taught. Pardon me. And I use those air quoting things. They haven't been taught. Millennials today, most of them do not know how to think. They know what to think. They know why to think. They just don't know how to think. And I don't want you to take that as an insult. I want you to think about what I was talking about earlier about lowering of taxes. You've been taught that lowering taxes lowers the amount of money to the Treasury, and that's not the fact. That is not the fact. And you're going to see that. The second month after Trump's tax cut, the federal government saw the most money ever taken in a single month. That was no accident. And it's going to continue that way. Now, again, let me explain the difference between liberals and conservatives. If spending stays the same and the tax cut goes, the deficit will go down. The liberals know this. So what their push is going to be to spend as much money as they possibly can that wipes out the tax cut, so that at the end it looks like Trump was wrong and they were right. It's not going to be about the tax cut. The tax cut is going to increase the income, and that's already happened. In order to balance the budget and lower the deficit, we got to cut the spending. And the liberals are never going to let that happen. You watch. It'll happen. It'll play out. If in these midterm elections we can get 10 more people in the Senate that are conservatives and hold the House, then we'll get some spending cuts done. Then we're going to get some major stuff done. Also in this age group of 18 to 65, let's talk about buying a home. Wow, you talk about government intrusion in every possible area. Let me give you just one example. You know all the loan paperwork that you fill out at the bank to get the loan, right? Okay. Most of those loans are sold to either private or government institutions, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or mortgage lending companies who end up selling them to the federal government. They all end up back at the federal government at some point or another. Now think about what you put on that loan application. You put everything that you know, including copies of your income tax, your work history, your income, your expenses, the address, everything there is to know, they know about you in writing in that file just from buying a home. All of the closing costs that are involved in a home purchase, it's one way or another is because of the federal government. The guy that inspects your house for termites and has to fill out a report, that report or that guy that inspects termites has to get a license from the government to do that job. Property tax. When you buy a home, you pay property taxes. Those property taxes is money that goes directly to the local government. So the federal government and a home purchase gets all the information. The local government gets somebody else paying the property taxes. And if you look at your property tax bill, uh, you know, property taxes were designed initially to pay for the education, which is supposed to be local. But when the federal government or the local government figured out that people were willing to pay property taxes and didn't look too close, I looked at one, it's been 10 or 15 years, but I looked at my property tax bill. There was probably 20 different agencies getting money off my property taxes. Like the fire department and the police department and the local library, the water department, they were all getting a cut of my property taxes in addition to money that they were getting from normal operations. If you want to add on to your house, change something in your house, there's all kinds of building codes and inspectors and permits. It's all about the money and the control. Now, I am not debating the rightness or the wrongness of these. I think some of these are good, and I think it's okay. But for the most part, a lot of these could be done away with. If a person wants to buy a house and doesn't want to pay for a termite inspection, I think they ought to be able to do that. Just sign a waiver saying I accept charges, or what's that one that they check in the basement for? That's that gas. If I want to buy one without getting that report, I should be able to do that. Sign a waiver, and if something happens, bad luck on me. But the federal government mandates it, and we have no choices. Just like the seatbelt, just like the child seat. Just like everything else the federal government is involved in. You can debate the rightness or wrongness of it, but the fact of the matter is, if it's mandated by the federal government, we have no choices here. And in your work age from 18 to 65, there are all kinds of taxes and fees and penalties. And I'm just going to read you some of them. Sales tax. Everything you buy, from toilet paper to a car to a boat to a mink coat, all have sales taxes in most states. Not all states, but most states. And of the states that don't have sales taxes, have an offsetting tax somewhere else, like a higher property tax or a higher income tax. But sales taxes, any licensing, like we talked about earlier, hunting and fishing, professional licenses like beautician, cosmetologist, barber. You have to have a license from the state to cut hair. At what point did that happen, and that's okay? I don't get that. Business licenses and fees. You want to open a business, whether you own it, the different forms of ownership doesn't matter. Just to register the business, you have to pay. Now, they vary from state to state, and most people do hunt that these days because the fees vary drastically. Insurance. Every time you buy any type of insurance, the insurance companies now know everything about you, and the insurance companies are heavily regulated by the federal government. When insurance companies go under, guess who gets all the paperwork? The federal government. Your income tax, state and federal income tax. Now think about this. Every year, the federal government gets 23% as the lowest tax bracket. Okay? So let's say you make $100,000. That means the minimum you're going to make or pay the federal government that year is $23,000. That means that for the first 3 months of the year, you are working strictly to pay your federal income tax bill. Now, let's add on top of that your state income tax bill. That's another month. So now you've worked 4 months of the year and you haven't done anything for yourself. Let's talk about sales tax. That's 10% of everything you buy. So if you buy $50,000 worth of stuff, you just spent another $5,000. So we'll say a couple of weeks. Okay? And you go down the list. Then your property tax, that's another couple of weeks. Every time you do something, the federal government gets a cut and you lose power and freedom. So the average person is working somewhere between 5 and 6 months a year just to pay their taxes off. That means you get to live on the rest. Good for you. Let's talk about marriage and divorce. At what point did it become okay for the government to require us to have a license to get married? As I read my Bible, a marriage is between a man and a woman and God. And if you want to have a ceremony, then it would involve a preacher and a witness. At some point, the government stepped in and said, "Hey, you got to have a license and you got to pay a fee. And if you get a divorce, you got to get another license. You got to go through the court system, which is more cost, and then you have to get a piece of paper that says you're divorced." And I mean, why is that? And when did that become okay? Again, you can debate the rightness and the wrongness of it, but the federal government is involved in every aspect of our life, everything. Okay, let's talk about the age of 65 and over. Health insurance. We just saw this played out in England this last week with baby Alfie. They have socialized medicine, which means the government controls it. The government made a medical decision based on uh, asset relocation. They didn't want to spend the money on this baby, and they wouldn't let the baby go to another country who would have picked up the cost. Why? Because it's about control. If they had let baby Alfie go to Italy and he survived and got well, the government in England would have looked inept and selfish and uncaring. The baby did die. Baby Alfie did die on Saturday. And as I said on another program, England, the government in England, and the physicians involved in that case in England, they all have blood on their hands, and God have mercy on your soul. That baby at least deserved a fighting chance. You were trying to kill that baby through your policy. God help you. But when Medicare is controlled by the federal government, Medicare is in control of the health care of our elderly when we are at our most vulnerable. And I'll give you an example. When I was selling insurance, I had a gentleman that was a World War II vet, and he was deaf, and he was complaining to me that he had to buy hearing aids. And I said, "Well, why isn't Medicare paying it?" And he said, "Medicare doesn't pay for hearing aids." And I said, "Oh." I said, "Well, how did you become deaf?" He said, "Well, when I was in World War II, I worked on jet engines." So he became deaf because he worked for the government. But the government is not going to pay for his hearing aids. When the government is involved in making medical decisions, they always mess it up. When the federal government gets involved in doing anything, they do it poorly and inaccurately. Just look at England. They continue to make wrong decisions and wrong choices for the wrong reasons. To have the federal government in charge of the medical care of our elderly is insane. Social Security is another one. It never ceases to amaze me that we pay into this for 40 or 45 years, and then when we retire, I find out I get $1,300 a month. What if I had taken the 10 or 15% that I would need to pay into Social Security, and I put it into my own 401k from the time I worked, and I can't touch that? I'd never miss the money because instead of going to Social Security, it goes to my 401k account, and the money just stays there. And through the power of compounding interest, I have millions of dollars when I retire. Millions. You don't believe me? Do the math. If you take $1,000 and put it into a 401k so that it follows the market, and leave it in there and don't touch it. Don't add to it, but don't touch it till the age of 65. You will have over $1 million. What if I put that $1,000 in when I opened it, and then I put in 15% of everything I make throughout my entire life, I'm going to have millions. Social Security is the biggest scam in my life perpetrated on the American people. We contribute millions and millions, and right now the federal government is trying to sell this lie. There are too many baby boomers receiving Social Security that millennials will never be able to pay for it. I got news for you. There are more millennials alive right now working than there are baby boomers by far. The math says that being true and the mortality rate being what it is, the Social Security rate on the millennials should be going down, or the payments to the baby boomers should be going up. They should be floating in money in the Social Security office. For them to claim anything else is a lie. Well, we've talked about the government intrusion and cost into our lives from birth to death. And I wanted to go through this because up until a few years ago, there was only one true place where it was still free to go. You're not free. You haven't been free in 50 years. You have been captive by the government, and you now work 5 to 6 months a year to satisfy the federal government through taxes and through money and giving up control. The federal government calls the shots. You're not free. But up until a few years ago, there was one last place where we were free, and that was online in the social media. That has changed. Currently, the individual owners of the social websites are trying to take control of speech, but they can't do that without a revolt going on. So what they're doing, the top three, Facebook, Google, and Twitter, they are all three working in concert with the liberals in Washington. They're trying to make it look like a fight, but they're working in concert so that the federal government will regulate the internet and social places, so that at that point, freedom of speech is now done with. Because the liberals will be writing the policies and the liberals are controlling the social websites, guess which speech is going to be controlled and eliminated? The conservatives. That is why we cannot allow the government to regulate the internet or the social websites. No matter what they say about indoctrinate or freedom of speech or the Russians or any of that, that's all lies and propaganda to get control of the internet, so they can control the speech, so they can control the talking points. Well, that's about all I wanted to say about that. Let's talk about now. Each week, I like to talk about some current events that are going on. This week, it was brought to my attention by a radio talk show host, and I agree with him 100%. I had thought this, but I hadn't been paying close enough attention to see how far this has gone. The Democrats have a new strategy for trying to convince conservatives to never get back in the political arena again, and it's called personal destruction. And if you go through some of the people that have been near Trump, Mike Caputo, Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, his attorney Cohen, the strategy that liberal Democrats are taking right now is this: they are out to destroy Trump, his administration, his friends, his businesses, his family, anything associated with Trump. They are out to destroy. The list of people I just gave you, they have destroyed their careers, their families, their finances, their businesses. They have litigated them to death. They have intimidated them to death. They have imprisoned them, and most of them they know they have imprisoned wrongly, but they don't care. The goal is destruction. I believe that these people and anybody else that is forced into that by the government that is proven innocent or pardoned should then be able to sue the government for any fees and costs involved in the lawsuit or detainment that was wrongly done by the federal government. I don't know if you can do that, but you should be able to. And I only because this, and even if you can't, I think the law should be changed because the liberals are using the federal government as a hammer to beat up on conservatives. And when that happens, somebody needs to step in and say that's wrong, and we need to make this wrong right. Also, this week, Special Counsel Mueller gave a list of questions to the Trump campaign. And it was really an odd list. Um, they were weird and open ended questions. And it proves a couple of things, I think. It shows one that the Mueller special investigation really has nothing on Trump. The questions were open ended. I think they're trying to look for loopholes or what he was thinking or what he was feeling. A lot of the questions had, "What did you think?" or "What were you feeling?" And the only purpose I could think of for those type of questions is motivation. As an example, they can't go after him for firing Comey because that's part of his job description. He can do that without cause. But if they can get him to answer a question about what he was feeling or thinking about uh, Comey while before he fired him, now you could find motivation. Now you can find a reason to go after him. And I think that's what those questions were designed to do. Very weird. But this is the week that happened. Also, one last thing, and I don't have specifics on this, but on the Big Island in Hawaii, a volcano has erupted. People are being evacuated. And I've seen pictures of the hot lava running down the hill and through the trees and over the highways, and it is absolutely unbelievable. If you haven't seen it, you should get online and watch that. Um, I mean, I've seen pictures before, but it's unbelievable. It's melting highways and it's burning down whole trees like they're nothing. So if you haven't seen it, you should get on there and take a look at it. Well, just one last thing before I go. This program and all programs that we do are sponsored and produced by the Prayer Box Ministry. And we have a website called prayerboxministry.org. That's ORG. Go over there and take a look. That website was designed to be an interactive website. There's lots to do over there. You can join a prayer group. Our programs are being streamed over there. Um, there's blogs you can go to, all kinds of videos. You have somebody read the Bible to you. Go over there and take a look. prayerboxministry.org. Well, that's the show for this week, folks. I look forward to next week when we can sit down and talk about this week in politics.